with your camera.
Yeah, I think it's because of having some people on here. All right. We are live and getting started with day 2 of EdTech in the Bend. Welcome, everybody. We are excited to kick off the day. Today's focus is social and emotional learning. We've got my friend Ken Shelton from all the way in LA. So it's 10 o'clock in my neighborhood. It's pretty early in his. So thank you, Ken, for waking up early and joining us. I first want to thank South Bend Community School Corporations for sponsoring us and getting started. And just like always, as you guys are jumping in on YouTube and Facebook, please introduce yourselves. Tell us where you're watching from so we can get to know you and have some fun. And Ken's presentation is going to be super interactive. And without further ado, I'm going to just hand it over to Ken so he can introduce himself and start rocking and rolling.
Good morning, everybody. I'm looking at the chat, so it looks like all of us, pretty much so far in the U.S. So it's a pleasure to be here and spend some time with you all. We're going to do something different because, well, that's how we roll, right? We're going to do something different as far as this session goes, and it's going to be highly, highly, highly interactive. So I'm going to take you all through a process that a very close friend of mine named Hugh Lanier developed, and it's basically looking at problem-based learning and design thinking and what happens when we put those two together. And since today's focus is on social and emotional learning, that's what we are going to work our way through. So what I'm going to ask you to do in just a few minutes is go to a website because I have my slides are loaded in Google Slides, and I'm using a platform called Pear Deck. And so that way you all will be able to see the slides that I have, and you'll be able to see me here, so that way, one, we can interact throughout the whole process, as well as Seth is going to bring some of you up on the screen to kind of share your thoughts around what we're doing. So if you'll look at your screen, it's joinpd.com is the web address, and then the code is NGBGI. So New Grapes Bother Green Incentives. That's one of the cool things about Pear Deck is they always they have these interesting codes to be able to join. So I'll give it a few minutes. And again, if one of you might be able to put it in the chat as well, it's scrolling across the chiron on across the bottom of your screen. Again, it's joinpd.com, and the code is NGBGI. And that's so you can see the slides. I have cards here that I'm going to hold up so that you can see them both here. And then if you connect to the slides, you'll be able to see them there as well. And I see the numbers going up. So good. That means many of you are getting connected. If for some reason you're having trouble getting connected, please put a comment in the chat, and then that way we could troubleshoot. But it should be reasonably simple. Again, go to joinpd.com, and then there's a code. So Seth put the web address and the code in the chat, and I will share with you all. You can connect on your phone, your tablet, or your laptop or your desktop. Any one of those will work. And we'll give it about another 15 seconds before we get started. I will share with you all while some of you are still getting connected. Again, this is a combination of design thinking and problem-based learning. You'll see the themes that we're going to focus on are related to social and emotional learning. You can change those themes to any particular focal point that you want to use. And it's actually a really fun and, again, interactive process. My favorite way to do this process is if we were able to all be in a group together, because then you could have more group interaction. But the way Seth and I have this planned out, some of you are going to come on the screen to kind of share your thoughts. And then, of course, share some of it in the chat as well. So it looks like some of you are still getting connected. Can I get a yes in the chat if you're connected successfully and you're ready to roll, please? So there's a comment in the chat, Erica, on your phone, tablet, or computer, if you go to joinpd.com and then put in that code, N as in Nancy, G as in good, B as in boy, G as in good, I as in India, it will connect you to the slides that I'm going to use for our presentation here. Okay, I got a whole bunch of yeses, so good. We'll give it about another 30 seconds if that's okay. Just I want to make sure everyone who's connected is able to join. And let's go ahead and get started. So, the whole concept of what we're doing is called solve it or solve in time. And again, this is a combination of design thinking and problem-based learning. This is meant to be interactive. So I will ask you all some questions and maybe share in the chat. For those of you that would like to vocalize some of your thoughts or sharing, you can even put in the chat, hey, call on me, and Seth can bring you up onto the screen. The other thing to share with you all is that I have the cards. So there's slides on, there are slides that have cards or graphics on them. I also have them here, and I will hold them up here as well. So the whole idea around this is normally we would pick teams, but of course, because of the way we're working together here, we are all a team. And so we're going to ignore that part, but ultimately this is the way it's going to work. So if you need, ignore the team help card as well. But ultimately what's going to happen is we're going to identify a problem, and I'm going to give you some themes that you will use to focus on for the problem. And then we're going to do some research on the problem, and you'll have some questions prompts around that. Then we're going to seek to have a better understanding of the problem. Sorry, my light. A better understanding of the problem. Then we're going to look at possible solutions to the problem. And then, of course, the big one, you got to show your work. We're going to share our solutions. So we're going to do an abbreviated version of this only for time's sake. And again, because we're not in the teams, but it's still good for us to go through this process. So that's the way it's going to work. And again, I will hold the cards up here, and then they also correspond with what you see on the slides. And so normally you would have, with your team, you would have one device and one note taker, but for the sake of this, we're going to work kind of as individuals. And so then now what I want us to do, we're going to focus on what problem we're going to identify. So you're going to pick a problem from a theme or a topic. So since the theme of the day today is social and emotional learning, what I'm going to ask you to do for a moment is think about a mindful culture or a restorative culture. So remember, a mindful culture, when you think in terms of the word mindful, it's you have an acute awareness, understanding of being in the moment. So it's essentially equivalent of we've eliminated a lot of distractions and we're focused on the individuals or the experience and circumstance that we are in at that particular moment. That's a mindful culture. A restorative culture is how do we essentially create a culture for restoration. So the short way I can describe it or explain it is if you think in terms of schools, most schools that do things that are heavily rules-based and enforcing of compliance and conformity, that is more punitive, as opposed to helping identifying strategies or pathways towards reconciliation or restoration. So that's a restorative culture. So if you have a conflict, for example, with two students, which by the way, conflict is a natural and inevitable thing, is that conflict treated in a punitive way, the kids are punished, or is it treated in a restorative way? We have a processes we go through to get a deeper understanding of what incidents occurred, why they occurred, who was involved, what their thinking and feeling was, and what they might do differently as an alternative going forward. That would be restorative. the way those two connect, of course, is again being in the moment and understanding the culture of your classroom, your school, or your district. And then restorative is, the conflict is inevitable, and how are we going to react to that conflict in a restorative capacity? So hopefully that makes sense to all of you. So I want you to be thinking in terms of one of those two themes that you're going to work on: identification of a problem, and we will work our way through the process. So the total time for these steps is going to be roughly about 15 minutes, or excuse me, 30 minutes. But it's going to take us this whole hour session because, one, we're going to be bringing some of you onto the screen, and two, we want to allow for more room for exploration. So the first question I have for you all is, are we good to go? Do you understand the directions? So on your screen, you should see a red dot. If you're connected, just drag it over to how well you understand. Thumbs up, you got it. Thumbs down, that that there's something I might need to explain a little bit further. And Seth, if you don't mind, we have a few folks that just joined. If you could drop the joinpd.com and then the code to connect to the slide deck in the chat, I would appreciate it. Thank you. So those of you that just joined, my slides are on Pear Deck and Google Slides. The Chiron on the bottom of your screen that Seth just put there and in the chat, you go to joinpd.com and then put that code in, and it will connect you to my slides. But I also have the graphics on the slides. I have the cards right here as well. Okay, so it looks like most of you understand. So for those of you that don't understand the instructions, I'll just run through them real quick one more time. You want to think in terms of a potential problem to solve that's either related to a mindful culture or a restorative culture. Okay, because the focus here today is SEL. Mindful culture or restorative culture? What kind of a problem might exist in one of those two areas? So, for example, a lack of a problem I would identify in a mindful culture is that there aren't mechanisms for students and teachers to have constructive dialogue. That would be an example. Restorative culture, a problem could be, we have a punitive discipline system that doesn't allow for students to grow and learn from their mistakes. That's two examples. And so again, for those of you that don't fully understand, you're going to identify a problem in one of those two, and then I'm going to take you through the process of how we can reach a sustainable solution to it. Okay, so there are your responses. So hopefully for those of you that said no, you don't understand, if you still have questions, please put them in the chat, and then I will do my best to respond to them. And this is why I like working to get better as a team. So let's go ahead and move on to the problem. So now, based on either a mindful culture or a restorative culture, I want you to take the next few minutes, so 3 minutes total, and identify what is the problem. So identify a real and relevant problem for us to solve around either a mindful culture or a restorative culture. So think in terms of your school, your classroom, your district. What is a real and relevant problem that's either aligned with a mindful culture or a restorative culture? And we'll take 3 minutes. And feel free to share, when we're done, feel free to share your thoughts in the chat. Thank you all for your comments in the chat. These are good ones. I really wish we were in the same room to where we could tackle a lot of these. So for those of you that are still have identified your problem, please feel free to put it in the chat. I want to highlight a few of them, Seth. So one, what Patricia put in, absolutely a lack of trained adults in mindfulness and restorative practices. There's a couple of them. There's that one. There was one that Bradley, yes, thank you. Bradley's not being able to make emotional connections with students while distant learning. How do we get teachers here in Malaysia to communicate with parents so the parents know what is going on? Okay. And then there was another one that is a consistent pattern I've seen as well. Stand by. It was actually two. So Ruth put one, clash of punitive and restorative belief systems in schools. That's a consistent thing that I've seen. And then also Jasmine, disproportionate suspension and expulsion rates for children of color. Exactly. Okay, so thank you all so much. You all have identified a lot of problems that, by the way, those are consistent, not just in schools here in the U.S. I've seen a lot of these challenges in schools really throughout the world. Okay, so now what we want to do, first of all, I'm wondering if anyone wants to come on the screen, Seth, just to kind of share a little bit more detail about the problem that they identified.
Just froze.
Okay, but don't worry about it for now. We'll wait until the next step. No worries. Okay, so the next step for you all to do now you basically have answered the question, what is the problem? So you've identified a real and relevant problem to solve and summarize it into a singular sentence. So the next step for us to do is we have to research the problem. And so there's a bunch of questions you could potentially ask. This segment is going to last 4 minutes. And so now I want you to use your personal knowledge and research skills to answer the following questions that are directly related to the problem that you just put up. And so the questions are going to be the following. Either where did the problem begin, or what caused the problem. Oops, there we go. So the problem that you identified, you either want to answer that or use your research skills, so your personal knowledge and research skills, and choose one of these two to help you, to take you through the process of solving the problem. So for example, the one that was the one that talked about the conflict between punitive and restorative practices, then I would say, okay, maybe I'll look at either where did it begin or what caused that problem. One of those two is going to be what we do. So you have 4 minutes to solve this, or excuse me, for this step. So please go.
All veils and misty streets are blue. Almond looks without children. Some silken moment goes on forever, and we're leaving broken hearts behind. Mystify, mystify me. Mystify, mystify me. I need perfection, some twisted direction that tangles me, keep me alive in all that exists, but none has your beauty. I see your face, and I will survive. Mystify, mystify me. Mystify, mystify me. A tiny wire with the power to make every moment come alive. All the stars will shine upon you when I kiss you every night. All veils and misty streets are blue. All that loves that chill divine. Some silken moment goes on forever, and we're leaving both hearts behind. Mystify, mystify me. Mystify, mystify me. You're a tiny wild bit of power to make every moment cloud. All the stars shine upon you when I kiss you every night. Mystify, mystify me. Mystify, mystify me. Mystify, mystify me. Mystify.
Okie dokie. So if you, for those of you that have identified using your personal knowledge and research skills, can you share in the chat your initial answer to one of the two questions? So going back through, we identified a real and relevant problem that related to either a mindful culture or restorative culture. And then now we used our personal knowledge and research skills to either identify where did the problem begin, or what caused the problem. So if you can, please share in the chat the results of this step around either of those two. And part of the reason why I'm asking you all to share it in the chat is because normally if we were working in a group, sometimes one of the most effective ways for us to solve problems is to be able to share the knowledge with others who might have either experienced the same problem and figured out a solution, or they're navigating a solution to the same problem as well. And Seth, Patricia has put in one that I know is consistent as well. Old practices in schools establishing guilt and punishment, lack of effective classroom management. And then Holly's also put one in. Holly, I would actually, and thank you for sharing that. I actually would argue not only in favor of what you're saying. I honestly don't think it's a lack of funding. I think it's a lack of the allocation of the funding. Can you also highlight Valerie's comment, because that one? Okay, thank you, Valerie. So that ties in with many of the other comments around. Even Latifa has it in there. Disconnect between cultures. You know, keep in mind that if your cultural identity isn't aligned with that of your students, you run the risk of not being able to understand and or interpret the differences in the way we communicate, the differences in our nonverbal communication, the differences in many of our what I would call normalized customs. And in fact, I actually would argue that, because many of you have kind of put it on here, I actually would argue that in some cases, the school culture is more, it is representational of the dominant culture, which is usually white-centered, and just ignores or conveniently essentially tries to marginalize those that aren't aligned with that. And that's when you start getting into what one of you mentioned earlier, that's when you start getting into those massive discipline disparities. And especially if you draw those along first race, then gender, then socioeconomic lines. Seth, is it possible to bring anyone on stage just to share a little bit more thoughts? I would love to hear. I mean, we can read, but I'd love to hear from someone if it's at all possible. Okie dokie. So let's go ahead and move on to the next step. And thank you all for your contributions in the chat. This is a wonderful chat. I hope you all are able to take notes, not only with what you're doing, but also the contributions that we're seeing in the chat. Okay, so just to recap, we identified a problem. We said, what is the problem? And this problem had to be associated with either a mindful culture or restorative culture on campus. Again, remember the focus today is on social and emotional learning. You then had to identify real and relevant problem and state it into a sentence. Then you just did your research on the problem, answering one of the two questions, either what caused that real and relevant problem, or where did the problem begin? Oh, yay. Okay. Holly, you're muted.
Yeah. He was supposed to tell me when he was going to pop me in. So yeah, I think that, I mean, the problem that I put down in the beginning was students coming from trauma-filled homes and that we don't have enough trained people in the schools to deal with it. And I think that the funding or the lack of allocation of funding, you're right, is not being put to good use for that. And then we have high-stake testing, which then teachers feel like you're on a train that you have to get to the standard, get to the standard, get to the standard. And sometimes you don't have time for that emotional learning.
Thank you for sharing that. You're absolutely right. And, of course, when you get into the whole idea around standardized testing, that's a whole nother conversation for us to have around the cultural disconnect of standardization in general. And as Holly just shared, when you're pushed for that high stakes testing, because that's what we're evaluated on, it really eliminates or strips us of the human element, which I can say is for many of us, that's the reason why we work in education. So thank you for sharing those thoughts, Holly. And for those of you that put in the chat, thank you so much. I'd love for more of you to share your thoughts. Let's go on to the next step. So again, problem, identified it either on restorative or mindful culture. Then you did some research using your personal knowledge and research skills. Now it's time for deeper understanding of the problem. So now the next step for us is to have a better understanding. So we identified it, we researched it. Now we want to have a better understanding of it. And so this step will take right around 4 minutes. And what I'm going to ask you to do here is use your empathy and your compassion skills. So let me explain something about this here. Empathy and compassion are not necessarily synonymous. And in fact, I argue that empathy has a lot more limitations to it than compassion. Let me explain the difference. Empathy is usually associated with, well, walk a mile in my shoes so you can be empathetic. How truly empathetic are you going to be if you know that at the end of that mile, you can take my shoes off? How immersed are you going to be in my lived experience, knowing that it's for a finite period of time? Compassion is, I have a deeper understanding of your lived experience. I am mindful of that, and I understand our differences and why that experience of yours might not be aligned with my experience. See, they're very different. In addition, with compassion, I can have a much more responsive component to your lived experience. So in this context, we want both. So the questions for you related to the problem that you've identified, and we'll take roughly about 4 minutes, probably closer to 3, because I do want to bring some more up on stage. Here are your questions. So that original problem. So you have either, when did you first notice the problem? Or why does the problem matter to you? So when did you first notice it? Or why does it matter to you? We'll take right around 3 to 4 for this. I'll get some music going. And then when you finish using your empathy and compassion skills here, please feel free to share your comments in the chat.
If you wanna keep something precious, gotta lock it up and throw in the keys. You wanna hold on to your possessions, don't even think about it. If you love somebody, if you love someone, if you love somebody, if you love We can live here and be happy with less. So many riches, so many souls. Everything we see that we want to protect. If you need somebody, call my name. If you want someone, you can do the same. If you want to keep something precious, gotta let out and throw away the key. Hold on to your possession. Don't even think about it. If you love someone, if you love someone, if you love someone, if you love someone, set them free, set them free, set them free.
Okay, please feel free to share some of your thoughts around this step in the chat. A lot of you have put some amazing comments on here. Again, this is why it's important for us to be able to share our thoughts and make them visible. A couple of them that I noticed. One, Ruth shared, I think this is really, really important for us to, again, mindfulness now, as to why it matters to Ruth. It matters to me because when adults are focused on the conflict between their systems, they lose focus on supporting students. So Ruth, that is critical because keep in mind, that is aligned with mindfulness. Because if you're focused on one thing, then you're distracted from the moment and the people within that moment. So thank you so much for sharing that. And there was another comment. I like Jasmine's comment as well. It matters because education is an equalizing factor. By dismantling the problem, it means to dismantle systemic roadblocks that prevent learning and future success for our children. Yes, yes, yes. A lot of you, it's hard to keep up with all of the comments, but you all have got some amazing comments on here. What I would love for, Seth, if we can we get maybe one volunteer to come and kind of share, even if they put a comment in the chat, just to kind of verbalize their thinking around their understanding. So using their empathy and compassion skills to answer the question.
Yeah, so one of them that will raise their hand, we'll jump them on here.
Yeah, well, one of you come on screen so you can share. Even if you've already put a comment, we'd love to hear your thoughts, please.
And we're also trying to add a couple more to the group. Any takers? Any takers?
And so while Seth is doing that, Tracy, yes, teachers need, and isn't that tie in with what Holly shared earlier? Teachers need training in social and emotional learning as a part of their curriculum as well. So yes, and let's go back to what Holly had mentioned earlier in regards to high stakes testing and the allocation of resources, financial resources. Nico also has a good one. Lack of student voice is an important problem because not all students learn the same way. Exactly. The student voice is aligned with student agency. And Bethany's comment as well. Lack of connection leads to lack of care from everybody involved, teachers, students, parents, and administration. Someone giving up on a child due to issues that can be solved just by listening. So Bethany, yes, may I add to that a couple of things. So one is the understanding of a listening culture, which is aligned with being mindful and being restorative. And that is, how are we creating mechanisms for meaningful dialogue, where I don't have it in this slide deck, but in a whole nother one, I go through the process of what does it mean to be an empathetic and attentive listener versus a dismissive listener. And I will add also to your comment there, you have teachers, students, parents, and administration. may I add also everyone associated with the school. And I'll share with you all because we're doing good for time, a very short story. I had the privilege of keynoting a school district kickoff for a friend of mine who's a superintendent in a school district in Northern California. And in the context of us planning for my keynote, she wanted to raise the awareness in the school district around the social and emotional health of the students and also of the adults. And that's one of the components that I say no SEL program is effective or sustainable if it doesn't include if it doesn't have three foundational components. Number one, it must include anti-bias and anti-racist ongoing professional development. Number two, it must provide for social and emotional supports for all of the adults. And then number three, it must also provide for student agency. And so when I say all of the adults, going back to that example of that keynote, we were talking about it. And so ultimately, in the context of our conversation, we both simultaneously reached the conclusion that for my keynote, every single adult in the school district should be present for that keynote and as a part of the district kickoff. And so prior to me going on stage, I actually had a conversation with a gentleman who was one of the bus drivers in a school district. And it literally clicked into my head while we were talking, because his route was going to be changed. And at the end of that school year, he shared with the students and their families that they were changing his route. Now, of course, the families and the students were disappointed, because think about it. If I'm a student and I ride the bus, that bus driver is the very first representative of school to start my day and the last one. And so we started talking, and ultimately he didn't have his route changed because enough parents were like, no, we want him to be our driver. Our kids love him. They want to see him. They want to see him in the morning. They want to see him in the afternoon. And so for me, when you think in terms of school culture or school district culture, it's not just the parents, the students, the teachers, the administration. It's the teacher librarians. It's the office staff. It's the food service staff. It's the bus driver. It's all. And if you work in a school, you have some sort of influence on not only the culture of the school, but the experience that the students have. So with that being said, thank you all for your comments here. Let's go on to the next, which is the solve. So for this step, you're going to answer the question using your imagination and critical thinking skills. Now, the key here is the following. No solution is off limits. So even if you think to yourself, okay, I know what Ken is talking about and I have a solution, but I don't really think it would happen. Go with that solution, because you just never know. The whole point here is a friend of mine who uses it a part of his problem solving process too. It's the dream phase. If I can dream and vision it, then that increases the likelihood that it could happen. So here we're not worried about absolutes. We're thinking more of, if I use my imagination and then my critical thinking skills, how would I solve the problem? And so here are the questions to answer next. They are, who are some of the people that can help you solve it? Or, let me get this right. How might you solve it in a new way? So the question, the problem, who are some of the people that can help you solve it? Or how might you solve it in a new way? Sorry with the screen, the light. How might you solve it in a new way? This will only take us about 3 minutes or so, and then we'll see about getting someone on stage, and we're doing okay for time. So I'll get some music going. Again, who are some of the people who can help you solve it? How might you solve it in a new way? This is when we're using our critical thinking and imagination.
We are the children, last generation. We are the ones time. And I wonder if we are ever gonna change. Living under the fear till nothing else remains. We don't need another hero. We don't need to know why. All we want is what we got. Looking for something we can rely on. To be something there out there. That day is coming. All else are clouds still in the air. And I wonder when we are ever gonna change. Living under the fear till nothing else remains. All the children say we don't need another hero. We don't need to know why. All we want is what we got. So what do we do in our lives? We leave our faith behind. We're still shine like a light. Or is this the now? Is it all
Okie dokie. So, Seth, if we can, a couple of things before we go into the last step. Like you said, we're doing good for time. There are so many wonderful comments in here. I would love to highlight several. So, Tamla Anderson, I love that one. Open our public school buildings up in the evenings for parent and teacher discussions away from just talking about academics and after the fact conversation. Yes, 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 and yes times a million. Schools should be a significant pillar in the community, not an isolated node that the kids go to for a certain period of time and then they're disconnected from it. Yes. Think about what can happen in a community if the school is essentially the community center where people go for, students go for academics, parents go for support, whether on a variety of levels. And then there's things that occur on campus that aren't directly related to either academics or anything that can be partitioned out to just school. I agree with that 1,000%. There was another comment. So I like Kimberly Lewis, her comment as well. To solve the problem, we could reach out to other educators who excel at connecting with students to learn what they're doing differently. Having positive mentors would help students and teachers. Yes, I agree with that as well. And that precisely is one of the reasons why with this question, as far as who are some people that can help you solve it, for sure. And then there was one other one I want to find here. Okay, so Judy Gilman, hers as well. Social workers and counselors are beneficial, but primary schools do not have counselors and little time with social workers. That is a problem in itself. Yes, 100%. And this goes back to the comment that Holly had mentioned. around the allocation of money or resources, financial especially, towards high stakes testing, where for me, that's why I mentioned if you reallocate it towards that. So I'll share with you all another side note story real quick. And then Seth, it'd be great to have someone come up onto the screen in the time we have left. I'll talk about what the last step is, even though we won't be able to do it. But I will share with you all, if you start looking at school district budgets and you start looking at where monies are allocated, think about how much more effective, mindful, restorative, and overall a healthy social and emotional environment is if we start reducing monies in areas that are aligned with punitive, destructive, conformity, and compliance, and put it towards restorative things like every school should have a licensed clinical social worker available. Even, I mean, to me, it'd be great if it were on a daily basis, but at a minimum, several times a week, and dedicate time for students who have needs that a licensed clinical social worker can help support, so that it's not this game of, okay, well, if you do this, then you're not in your academics. It doesn't have to be a binary. It doesn't have to be this or that. It should be this and that. And then in turn, supporting counselors who support teachers, who support students, who support parents, who support the admin. You all see, that's how you can start creating a much more inclusive and mindful culture, as well as restorative culture around all of those things. Oh, yay, good. Hi, Patty.
Hi.
Please share with us your thoughts. I like when someone comes up on screen, so thank you.
Surprise! You know, I thought there were so many wonderful comments made today from everyone participating. And one that really struck out to me was one that Kathy Sanders had talked about bringing, you know, the community school together and having the social workers involved and all of the parents and the students and everyone really involved in so many aspects of the school. I think that our families need more voice and need to be in our buildings more. And I think they want to be. It's just that we have to provide those opportunities for them. And like you said, the resources have to go to areas in need of students. I know we have Mindful You program here at school to teach mindfulness and yoga, and then also to train teachers. But I think we need so much more of that. That's just a little slice, and we have so many more people that we need to bring in. But yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation. I think everyone's been like really commenting. Really,
the comments are great. Yes, I agree. Thank you for coming on screen. Thank you.
Thanks.
And you know, Seth, Valerie has an important comment there as well. If you could highlight that, make sure there are Black, Indigenous, people of color teachers on every campus. I agree 100%. Need to work with HR, admin, and teachers rarely work together. Yes. And the reason why this comment stands out to me as well is because if you look at a lot of our large urban school districts, there is a significant, disproportionately high percentage of Black male and female students and Latinx students that are either suspended, expelled, or redesignated to special ed. And that goes back to some of the comments earlier around being able to make the cultural connection. So Chad's on the screen. Chad, you want to share a few thoughts?
I was just going to comment on the role of reflection in this whole process that you've been talking about. I look over here at all the comments, and I just think about the benefits that are coming from us looking back at an issue and getting to the bottom of issues. And that role of reflection is obvious right here for us, and how reflection plays a role in the problem solving process, and how students can also benefit from this in what you've identified as like a restorative problem solving process.
Thank you. Absolutely. So thank you all so much for your contributions. I hope you all, in the context of working your way through this process, have been able to look through the chat. There's a lot of wonderful comments, ideas, and things of that nature put in the chat. The next step that we would have done, because we're getting short on time, would have been to use our use our communication and creativity skills to actually create a solution to the problem. So that's where you show your work. And I don't know if any of you have caught it, but if you notice that this is problem-based learning and design thinking, but we also in this whole process are doing the 4 C's. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the 4 C's, they are communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. And so that's embedded in the process of what we're doing. So if we had the time to do it, which I'm glad we focused on the steps to the process, this would have been next. How might I design a solution to the problem to be able to communicate it to a specific or selected audience? So what I want to share with you all in a few minutes we have left, if you go to that particular, those are the ways you could do it. If you go to that particular website, that is a Google Doc. It'll force you to make a copy. That is for you as far as a reflection of this particular process that we did, just to kind of give some thoughts around it. And then I know there were a couple of comments about the cards and stuff. And so on the next slide, I'll share with you the website. And like I said, it was developed, who's also an educator, a very close friend of mine, Dee Lanier. The website, if you put in my name, it's for a code if you want, but he also has on the website. So the cards aren't going to look like these because it's a PDF, but he also has where you can download them as well. So Ken's.link, Seth, can you put this in the chat so that everyone has the web address to go to be able to make a copy of the reflection document, please?
Yeah, we're going to put this reflection document, try and get it in the notes here right now, but also we'll be following up with emails. And so everyone will have the opportunity to
okay, perfect.
A little later.
And then also for those of you, because some of you asked, where can you get the cards? There's 2 things. One, if you go to that website, there's two parts. One, there's a free download, which you can download, print them out. Or if you want the actual cards, like what I'm holding up here, if you just put in, because I asked Dee to hook me up with a code. So I'm like, if I've got educators that want to be able to do this, you got to give me a code so that at least they can get a discount. And so there's that. Now, I will share with you all that he does have several expansion packs. There is the SEL expansion pack, which we would have done next. There is the equity expansion pack. There's an anti-bias, anti-racist expansion pack as well. And so with that being said, we only have basically a minute or 2 left. What I want to ask everyone is just kind of share in the chat. First of all, before you share in the chat, I want to share my sincere appreciation for all of you being mindful and being reflective in this whole process. The comments have been fantastic, and I was very happy to spend what was originally a very early morning for me, but it's all good. I was excited about this together. Seth, thank you for this. Thank you for handling this on the back end. And so just kind of share in the chat, just some final thoughts around what we've done. And hopefully this will be a good stepping stone for all of you going forward, as far as not only the design thinking and problem-based learning process, solve in time, but also ideally in the comments and what you've done, you have a pathway towards an actual solution to your problem. Of course, I always say it's a way, not the way.
Thank you so much, Ken, for sharing everything you did. For those of you who weren't able to attend last year, Ken came to Riley High School and kicked off EdTech in the Bend, pretty similar to this, just rocked it. And so it's been beneficial for me. I got a friend out of it all the way in LA.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I got a coffee from Zen Cafe out of it.
Yeah. And so thank you so much, Ken, for doing this again. We've got comments coming in. I'm going to try and pop those up as they're coming in. And so just want to encourage everybody to continue watching EdTech in the Bend on YouTube and Facebook. We've got Kim Clark up next, Ben DeMonkis, Jonathan Redeker, and Tara Klein finishing out the day.
May I add one more comment real quick? So for all of you that have tuned in, keep in mind the process you just went through, that applies across any content area. Remember, all you have to do is change the theme or the focus and still go through that same process. It applies across all content areas. So it's not just us learning and doing this within the scope of what we did. You can take this exact same process and apply it with your students. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, keep in mind, I'm using Pear Deck and Google Slides. So now my slides were fully accessible for all of you to see as well. So I know that we're challenged with navigating remote learning, and it's uncharted waters for a lot of educators. These are some of the ways that we can make our connections with our students as meaningful and as purposeful as we can under the circumstances. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. We'll talk to you guys later. Bye.